Have you ever felt like you're living in a perfect world, but something truly important is missing? Ethan Reed, a successful billionaire, seemed to have it all: houses, cars, money. But he was missing the most precious things: love and connection. Everything changed when he met two homeless girls at a busy subway station. This is the story of a man, a lonely heart, and two children that will make you realize that true love doesn't come from what we own, but from the decisions we make every day. Watch the video to witness the touching and unexpected journey of Ethan, Eleanor, and Sophie. Ethan Reed lives in a world measured by numbers. At 38 years old, he is the founder and CEO of Novatech, a multi-billion-dollar clean energy technology conglomerate. His life is perfectly arranged, leaving no room for spontaneity or mistakes. Every morning, a black Mercedes picks him up at 700 a.m., neither a minute earlier nor later. His breakfast, a green smoothie and a bowl of oatmeal, is always prepared and waiting on the table in his 900-square-meter penthouse, overlooking the entirety of Manhattan. Every schedule from board meetings to video calls with partners in Asia is meticulously arranged by his secretary, Mrs. Chen, down to the minute. Ethan's success is legendary on Wall Street. A child who grew up in orphanages and foster homes in the Bronx, he built an empire from scratch. He is the embodiment of the American dream, a self-made man, cold, decisive, and never allowing emotions to overpower reason. He believes that to survive in this harsh world, you must be resolute and strong. Ethan has done just that, but in return, he has become an isolated island amidst the vast ocean of relentless busyness. His penthouse is an architectural masterpiece: Italian marble floors, towering glass walls, minimalist interiors, and an expensive collection of contemporary art. But it's not a home, it's a cold gallery. Every night when he returns, the echo of his footsteps reverberates in the vast space, a constant reminder of the emptiness. Dinner is usually a simple meal set out on the table, and he eats alone, his gaze drifting over economic news on his tablet screen. His loneliness is not due to a lack of friends, but because of a lack of genuine connection. All his relationships are transactional. His life is an endless loop: work, return, sleep, and work again. No surprises, no emotions, no one to share with. Each evening, Ethan's private train takes him to Novatech's headquarters and picks him up at 6:45 p.m. Grand Central Station to him is just a transit point. It's a noisy, chaotic place full of hurried people. Ethan often glides through the crowd, unaware of anyone around him. He moves quickly, his eyes glued to his phone screen, as if trying to disconnect from the reality around him. Mind your own business. That's the unwritten rule that New York has taught him since he was a child. Yet on one ordinary Tuesday evening, something broke through his indifference. As he walked along Platform 28, his eyes unintentionally landed on a blue bench. On it sat two small figures, two girls. Ethan paused unconsciously. They were always there on the same bench at the same time. 6:47 p.m. When his train arrived, he noticed their little legs swinging in the air, not touching the ground. Their eyes, wide and watchful, scanned the crowd like little sentries waiting for orders. For the first time, Ethan merely acknowledged their presence. He thought it was an odd sight, but not his concern. The second time, he became curious. He began to steal glances at them over his shoulder, wondering why the two children, the older one looking no older than 7, were alone in the busiest train station in the city. By the third time, a bigger question began to haunt his mind. Why were they here? This worry, like a grain of dust in a perfectly functioning machine, began to disrupt Ethan's life. He wasn't someone who changed his routine. His schedule was unshakable. But on the fourth occasion, a strange urge compelled him to act. At 6:28 p.m., 20 minutes before the train arrived, Ethan suddenly stood up, ending the meeting with Mr. Davies, the CFO. "Mr. Reed, we haven't finished reviewing the Asian numbers," Mr. Davies said, surprised. "Finish it off," Ethan replied, grabbing his coat. The employees exchanged confused glances. Ethan Reed had never left a meeting early, never interrupted, never changed his schedule. He walked away with his thoughts in turmoil. Thousands of sad stories in New York, countless unfortunate fates. Why were these two children weighing so heavily on his mind? He had lived through tough years in an orphanage, and he understood deprivation. But abandoned children were usually loud, begging for money, food, or attention. These two girls, however, were silently waiting, as if they had already accepted their fate. When he arrived at the platform, there were still 15 minutes before the train came. He sat down on a bench across from them, holding his phone to appear busy. Then at precisely 6:35 p.m., they appeared. The older one, Eleanor, firmly held the hand of the younger one, Sophie, with an unusual strength for her small frame. Their clothes were simple worn, but clean. Their hair was messily braided. Sophie carried a small yellow backpack, and Eleanor had a faded blue backpack with a unicorn design. They sat down on the green bench, placing their backpacks between them and assuming their usual position, their legs swinging in the air, their eyes alert. Ethan noticed something he hadn't before. They didn't talk to anyone, not even to each other. They communicated through glances, subtle touches, almost invisible gestures. A secret code only the two sisters understood. The crowd passed by unaware of them. Businessmen with their faces buried in screens, students with headphones blocking the world-confused tourists. All ignored the two small figures seemingly existing in a different dimension, a realm of the invisible. At 7:30 p.m., Eleanor took a crumpled package of cookies from her backpack. She carefully divided it into 2 equal parts meticulously. They ate slowly, as if they knew they had to conserve every crumb. Ethan felt a sharp pang in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. He sat there motionless, watching the two sisters sleep peacefully as the station grew quieter. When the last train left at 11:30 p.m., the station was nearly empty, with only a few workers cleaning up a few homeless people and him, a billionaire, sitting on a train station bench watching the two children sleep. A security guard came close, but upon recognizing him, just nodded respectfully and walked away. There's an advantage to being one of the richest people in the city. Ethan didn't leave. He stayed there all night. At 5:45 a.m., when the two girls woke up, Ethan was still there. Eleanor carefully folded the blanket, took her sister to the public restroom, and then they returned to their original bench. It was only then that Ethan realized they hadn't left the station. They lived there. Ethan Reed, who owned 3 luxurious villas, 3 places to call home, finally found the meaning of life in a place he had never imagined, a cold train station alongside 2 homeless girls. And at that moment, a new purpose, not programmed, not in any schedule, began to blossom within him. He would do something different. Today, he would not just pass through this waiting platform. He would return. And perhaps, just perhaps, the 3 of them, so familiar with the pain of waiting, could find something different together. The next morning, Mr. Davies and Mrs. Chen exchanged a confused glance. Ethan was 12 minutes late. For the first time in many years, he wasn't on time for the first meeting of the day. His $3,000 Italian suit was wrinkled, his appearance weary, but there was a strange concern in his eyes. He sat at the table, his mind still lingering on the image of the 2 little girls asleep on the cold bench. He tried to focus on the numbers, the growth charts, the potential investments, but his mind kept drifting back to those 2 wide, watchful eyes. He remembered how Eleanor had carefully divided the cookie package as though it were the most precious thing in the world. He thought of their silence, their communication only through gestures. It wasn't the silence of mischievous children. It was the silence of souls too familiar with deprivation, with having to protect themselves in a world full of dangers. Throughout the workday, that concern never stopped haunting him. Why them? New York had thousands of heartbreaking stories, millions of homeless people. He had once been one of them, and he had built a solid wall to protect himself from that world. He believed that indifference was a necessary survival tool, yet those 2 children had pierced through his defenses so easily. It might have been their silence, or maybe it was the way they asked for nothing. Or perhaps it was the loneliness he saw in Eleanor's eyes, the premature maturity on her innocent face. It reminded him of himself, a 12-year-old boy sitting in front of a welfare center, hoping and waiting for a miracle that never came. The pain of waiting, it was a wound deep in his soul, a wound that even $23 billion couldn't heal. At exactly 5:45 p.m., Ethan stood up. "I have to leave," he told Mrs. Chen when she came to remind him about the next meeting. "Mr. Reed, you have an online meeting with a partner in Tokyo," Mrs. Chen reminded him in a surprised tone. "Cancel it," Ethan replied firmly. Mrs. Chen was stunned. Cancel a meeting with major partners that had never happened before. Ethan rushed out of the building, hailing a taxi instead of waiting for his private car. He didn't want to waste a single moment. Grand Central Station was still noisy and chaotic, but this time Ethan wasn't gliding through. He was searching. His eyes scanned the crowd, looking for the familiar blue bench, looking for 2 small figures. When he saw them, his heart clenched. They were still there. exactly as they had been the night before. The same posture, the same expression, only today they weren't eating cookies. Sophie rested her head on Eleanor's shoulder, her eyes beginning to close. Eleanor's face was serious, her gaze fixed on the tracks. Ethan walked toward them, feeling more anxious than he had in front of a board of directors. He stood in front of them, his hands clenched. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice a little shaky. "Good evening." The two girls jumped, Eleanor pulling Sophie closer, her eyes wary. The brown eyes of the older girl, the same color as his, looked straight at him, a mix of skepticism and unyielding pride. Ethan felt out of place. "Are you waiting for someone?" He knew it was a silly question. They were always waiting. Eleanor remained silent, but Sophie, the younger one, finally spoke. Her voice was so soft that Ethan had to bend down to hear her. "Our mom." Ethan nodded as though the answer made perfect sense. "Has she been gone long?" Eleanor finally spoke, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so young. "Mom went to find food. She told us to wait." Ethan looked around. A bustling subway station, two children alone. "When did your mom leave?" The two sisters looked at each other. Eleanor lifted her chin. 4 days ago." Time seemed to stop. 4 days, 96 hours, 760 minutes, waiting for someone who said they would return. A suffocating sense of pain rose in Ethan's chest. It wasn't pity. He had hated the pitying looks of adults when they looked at him in the orphanage. This was something deeper, more instinctive, empathy. He remembered 28 years ago. Another bench, another wait. "Your mom will come get you soon, Ethan. You just have to wait a little longer." And he, at 12 years old, believed it waited day after day, night after night. His mom never came. Ethan felt his eyes burn. The past and present blended together. When had he stopped crying? He couldn't remember. "Uncle, are you crying?" Sophie asked, her innocent curiosity ringing in her voice. Ethan flinched, quickly wiping his tears away. He felt ashamed. "It's okay," Eleanor said, as though she were the one comforting him. "Mom will come back. She promised." The trust in her voice, the naive certainty that adults always keep their promises, that mothers always return, cut into Ethan like a knife. "What are your names?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "Eleanor," the older girl answered. "And this is Sophie." Sophie smiled, revealing a chipped front tooth. "You're rich, aren't you? Your clothes look like the men on TV." Ethan looked down at his wrinkled Italian suit and felt foolish. "Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable." Eleanor looked at him with eyes that were older than her years. "If you're rich, why are you sad?" The question stunned Ethan. How could a child see through the layers of masks he had carefully built over decades? "Sometimes people are still sad, even if they have money," he answered honestly. Eleanor nodded, as if confirming something she had suspected for a long time. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked, changing the subject. Sophie looked at Eleanor, waiting for permission. Eleanor hesitated, weighing the enormous responsibility on her small shoulders. "We have cookies," she finally said, opening her backpack to reveal a nearly empty package. "Would you like a proper breakfast?" Ethan offered, pointing to the cafe in the station. "Your mom won't mind if you eat while you wait, will she?" Eleanor bit her lip, calculating the risks. "We can't leave here. What if Mom comes back and doesn't find us?" Ethan felt another pang in his chest. He understood. He understood that fear. "Then I'll bring the food to you." 15 minutes later, he returned with a tray full of waffles, scrambled eggs, orange juice, and milk. The two girls ate hungrily, as if it had been a long time since they had a proper meal. Ethan sat quietly next to them. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Should he call the authorities, social services? Would it help? Could the system that had failed him work for them? "Are you going to tell anyone about us?" Eleanor asked, as if reading his mind. Ethan hesitated. "You can't stay here forever." "We won't stay forever," she argued. "Just until Mom comes back." He wanted to say that maybe Mom would never come back. He wanted to explain that sometimes adults leave and never come back. He wanted to talk about the endless waiting, but he couldn't, not with that trust still in her eyes. "How do you two survive here?" he asked. Eleanor shrugged, as though living alone in the train station was perfectly normal. "We have a bathroom we can use. The coffee lady sometimes gives us sandwiches when she has extra. There's a water fountain, and we're careful with strangers." "How did you know you could trust me?" Sophie asked, surprising him. "Your eyes are sad like ours," she answered simply. Ethan blinked, disarmed by Sophie's simple observation. The digital clock at the station read 7:32 a.m. Normally, he'd be in the office reviewing reports leading the first meeting of the day. Instead, he was sitting on a train station bench next to two orphaned children, though they hadn't realized that yet. "I have to go to work now," he said, standing up, "but I'll come back later to see how you're doing." Eleanor nodded, her face not fully trusting. "Adults always promise to come back. You won't go anywhere, will you?" he asked. Sophie smiled. "We never go anywhere. We just wait." Ethan felt her words land like a physical blow, for he understood. He deeply understood what it was like to wait for someone who never comes. As he left the train station, the early New York sunlight hit him with a strange intensity. The world outside was the same people rushing to work, car horns blaring. But something had changed. For the first time in decades, Ethan took a deep breath and felt more than the familiar emptiness. He felt a purpose growing unexpectedly and inevitably. Today, he would return to that bench. And perhaps, just perhaps, the three of them, knowing the pain of waiting, could find something different together. 3 days had passed since Ethan Reed met Eleanor and Sophie. Those 3 days had completely transformed his previously unshakable routine. Mrs. Chen, his secretary, was the first to notice the change. "Mr. Reed, the meeting with the Chinese investors is scheduled for 7 p.m. tonight. Should I confirm it?" she asked, peeking through the office door. Ethan glanced at the clock. It was now 4 p.m. "Cancel it," he replied, his eyes never leaving the computer screen. Mrs. Chen blinked, confused. Cancel a meeting with major investors? Ethan, whom she had known for 8 years, had never done that. "Mr. Reed, this is the Shenzhen Group. They flew all the way here just for this meeting." "I said cancel it, Mrs. Chen," he interrupted, looking up and meeting her gaze. "Move it to tomorrow morning. I have an appointment I can't miss at 6. Mrs. Chen nodded and silently left. In the glass hallways of Novatech, rumors began to spread. First, he had left an important meeting early. Then he was late for the first time in years. Now he was canceling a scheduled appointment. Some speculated he was sick. Others guessed he was planning to sell the company. The more romantic among them wondered if Ethan Reed, the eternal bachelor, had finally found someone. No one guessed that someone was 2 small children at the subway station. At 5:45 p.m., Ethan walked into a nearby department store. He felt completely out of place among the stuffed animals and colorful pajamas. A saleswoman approached with a smile. "How can I help you, sir?" Ethan realized he had no idea what to buy. What size clothing did a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old need? "I need a few things for children," he said, his voice unsure. The saleswoman smiled. "What kind of things? We have a whole section dedicated to children." "Blankets." Ethan recalled the thin blanket Eleanor had brought. "Warm blankets and maybe toys, storybooks." "For boys or girls? How old are they?" "Girls," he answered. "One about 7, the other about 5. The saleswoman's smile softened. "First time shopping for daughters." Ethan wanted to clarify, but the words caught in his throat. "Something like that," he mumbled. 30 minutes later, he left the store with 2 large bags. Inside were 2 soft, star-patterned blankets, 2 small pillows, 2 stuffed bears, several children's books, crayons, and notebooks. He also added a small first aid kit. His next stop was an Italian restaurant on the corner of 5th Avenue. The restaurant owner, Mr. Vincenzo, knew him well. Ethan often ordered takeout when working late. "Mr. Reed, just like always?" the muscular Italian man asked. "Actually, today, I need something different, Antonio. Something kids will like." Mr. Vincenzo raised an eyebrow in surprise but asked no further questions. 15 minutes later, Ethan walked out with a bag containing spaghetti with meatballs, cheese ravioli, garlic bread, and 2 large pieces of tiramisu. At precisely 6:37 p.m., he arrived at Grand Central Station. Eleanor saw him first. Her cautious eyes spotted the tall figure in a suit crossing the platform. A flicker of doubt appeared in her eyes as he approached. "You're back," she said. It wasn't a question, but there was surprise in her voice. "I told you I'd come back," Ethan replied, sitting down beside them. Sophie, less reserved than her sister, flashed a bright smile. "Did you bring us a gift?" Ethan looked down at the bags he was carrying. "I brought a few things I thought you might need. And food, too. Have you had dinner yet?" Eleanor shook her head. "The coffee lady gave us a sandwich at lunch." Ethan set up a little feast right on the train station bench. He opened the food boxes, handed the girls plastic utensils, and served them. He watched as Eleanor carefully cut her food into smaller pieces for Sophie, how she checked to make sure it wasn't too hot before giving it to her sister. "You're a great big sister, Eleanor," he remarked. She shrugged, but a slight blush appeared on her cheek. "Someone has to take care of her." "Who takes care of you?" Ethan asked gently. Eleanor turned her face away. "I take care of myself." Sophie, her mouth full of ravioli, pointed to the bigger bag. "What's inside?" Ethan opened the bag and took out each item one by one. The girls watched with increasing curiosity. Sophie squealed in delight when she saw the caramel-colored stuffed bear, hugging it tightly right away. Eleanor was more reserved, but her fingers gently stroked the new blanket with great reverence. "It's so soft," she murmured. "I thought you'd be more comfortable while you wait." Ethan explained, suddenly feeling awkward. Had he been too presumptuous to think that he could improve their situation with just a few items? But then Sophie, with the natural ease of a small child, reached out and took his hand. Her tiny fingers wrapped around 3 of his fingers, a sharp contrast between the very small and the very large. "Thank you, Uncle," she said simply. Ethan looked at that little hand holding his, and something stirred in his chest. A simple, very natural gesture, yet deeply meaningful. He was stunned to realize that he couldn't remember the last time anyone had held his hand like that. Not for a contract, not for a benefit, just purely for human contact. "It's nothing, Sophie," he replied, his voice rougher than usual. Eleanor observed the interaction with sharp eyes, always watchful, always protective. But Ethan noticed a subtle shift in her posture, a slight relaxing, almost imperceptible in her shoulders, a softness in her tight lips. They trusted him, he realized. Not fully, not blindly. Eleanor was too smart for that, but enough to accept the food his presence. And he, with sudden clarity, wanted to live up to that trust, to be someone they could truly rely on. After they finished eating, Ethan asked, "Would you like to hear a story?" Sophie nodded eagerly. Eleanor shrugged, but her eyes gleamed with curiosity. Ethan picked up one of the children's books he had bought. "The Rabbit Who Wanted to Go to the Moon." He opened the first page and began reading. His voice, usually used to lead board meetings and close multi-million-dollar contracts, was now adjusted to narrate the adventures of a little determined rabbit. He even made voices for the characters, something he never imagined he could do. Sophie giggled at the funny parts. Eleanor pretended not to care, but leaned forward to look at the illustrations. Halfway through the story, Ethan noticed Sophie had nestled up to him, her small body leaning against him, her head almost touching his arm. Eleanor kept a cautious distance, but her eyes never left the pages. When he finished, Sophie clapped her hands. One more. Ethan smiled. "I'll bring another book tomorrow. It's getting late." Eleanor glanced at the station clock. "You don't live around here, do you?" "Not too far, just a few minutes by car." "Then why are you here so late? Don't you have a family waiting for you?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he answered honestly. "I live alone." Sophie looked confused. "But you're an adult." "Adults can live alone too, Sophie," Eleanor explained with the maturity of someone who had grown up too fast. "But that's so sad," Sophie insisted. Ethan didn't know how to answer. He had never really thought of his own loneliness as sad. It was just the way things were, a vacant apartment, silent nights, mornings, with no one to say good morning to. "Sometimes it's sad," he finally admitted. Eleanor looked at him with eyes that saw through everything. "Is that why you keep coming back here, because you're lonely too?" Ethan felt the weight of that simple question. Was that why? Was he seeking companionship in someone else's misfortune? No, it was more than that, much more than that. "I come back because I care about you both," he replied, surprised at his own honesty. "And because I know what waiting feels like." Those words hung between them, full of meaning. No one spoke for a few minutes, but something had been shared in the silence. An empathy, an understanding. When Ethan stood up to leave, Sophie clung to his hand. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "I'll come back," he promised. Eleanor still looked skeptical. "Everyone always says they'll come back." Ethan sat down at her eye level. "Eleanor, I know it's hard to trust, but I'll be here tomorrow on time. I promise." She nodded, not entirely convinced. "We'll see." And he did return the next day, and the day after that. On the third day, he brought hot soup in a thermos soap shampoo and a new toothbrush. On the fourth day, he came with fresh sandwiches and a small box of gummy candies that made Sophie squeal in delight. On the 5th day, he came early and read 2 stories. On the 6th day, Eleanor smiled at him for the first time. It was a small, tentative smile, as though she wasn't sure if she remembered how to smile, but it was real. And Ethan felt as though he had just closed the most important deal of his life. On the 7th day, when he arrived at the station, he saw the 2 girls waiting for him, their faces full of concern. "We thought you weren't coming today," Sophie said, her voice full of relief. "I'm just 10 minutes late," Ethan replied, glancing at his watch. Eleanor was really worried. Sophie revealed, causing her sister to glare at her. "No, I wasn't," Eleanor protested, but her cheeks turned red. Ethan felt a wave of love swell inside him. "Sorry I'm late. I had a meeting that ran longer than expected." "What do you do at work?" Sophie asked, curious. Ethan thought about how to explain his clean energy technology company to a 5-year-old. "I help make things that don't hurt the planet as much." "Like recycling?" Eleanor asked. "Kind of, but on a much larger scale." "That's amazing," Sophie said, though it was clear she didn't fully understand. Over time, Ethan's presence became part of their routine. No one asked why he came anymore. People just accepted that around 6 p.m., the man in the suit would show up with food and stories. The security guards, who had initially eyed him suspiciously, now just nodded discreetly. The coffee lady occasionally offered the 2 girls hot chocolate. A flower vendor who passed by every day began leaving small bouquets. The 2 girls, once invisible in the crowd, now had a small community around them. On the 10th day, when Ethan arrived at the station, he saw Eleanor crying quietly. Sophie had fallen asleep, curled up under her new blanket, clutching her stuffed bear. He sat down beside Eleanor without saying anything, respecting that she was trying to hold back her tears. "Mom's never coming back, is she?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan's heart tightened. He didn't need to ask who Eleanor was talking about. "I don't know, Eleanor," he answered honestly. He wanted to promise that everything would be okay, that her mom would return, that there would be a happy ending. But he remembered all the empty promises he had heard as a child. He couldn't make that promise. Eleanor wiped her tears with her sleeve. "Sophie still believes. Every night she says Mom will come back tomorrow." "And what about you?" She was silent for a long while. "I need to believe. For her," she finally answered, pointing to her sleeping sister. "But every day it gets harder." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I understand how that feels." Eleanor looked at him with a sad curiosity. "You've waited for someone who never came back, haven't you?" "Yes," he said simply. "How long?" Ethan thought about the years in the orphanage, always waiting, always hoping he'd be the next to be chosen. Then the unanswered letters he sent to his mother as an adult. "Too long," he finally replied. Eleanor rested her head against the train station bench, staring up at the ceiling. "How do you know when it's time to stop waiting?" Ethan took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I'm not sure we ever stop completely," he admitted. "But one day you realize you can build a life beyond waiting." Eleanor nodded slowly as if processing the information. "Do you think we can do that?" "I'm sure," he replied, realizing he truly believed it. "You two are the strongest girls I've ever met." They sat in silence for a few minutes, just watching the people pass by. Then Eleanor asked a question that would change everything. "What if we don't want to wait here anymore? Are there other places?" Ethan felt a wave of hope surge strong enough to almost knock him off his feet. "Yes, Eleanor, there are many places other than this train station." She looked at her sleeping sister, then at the man beside her. "I think Sophie would like to see those places." Ethan looked at the 2 girls, one sleeping with her stuffed bear, the other awake bravely facing truths far beyond her years. They still believe, he thought. And I had forgotten what that felt like. Not the naive belief that everything would be fine, but the true courage to keep going, even without assurances, to trust, even after being betrayed, to love, even after loss. Right there on that train station bench, Ethan made a quiet decision. He would show up where there had once only been absence. He didn't know how. He didn't know if he could, but he knew deep in his heart that he wouldn't abandon them. He would stay with them for them. The hope he saw in their eyes, even amidst so much pain, had rekindled something in him that he thought was lost forever. New York is famous for its sudden storms capable of turning a clear blue sky into a pitch-black mass within minutes. Meteorologists had warned of this particular storm, the biggest of the year, but no one could have anticipated its ferocity. Ethan was trapped in a meeting on the 47th floor of the Novatech building when the first thunderclap rumbled. From his office, he had a magnificent view of nature's display. Black clouds swallowing up skyscrapers, lightning cracking through the sky like fissures in a broken mirror. "It seems we're in trouble, sir," Mrs. Chen remarked as she entered his office with some documents. "The subway lines have reported delays." Ethan glanced at his watch. It was 5:38 p.m. The girls would be waiting for him. "Cancel my dinner with the Japanese investors," he said, abruptly standing up. "But Mr. Reed, they flew in from Tokyo for this meeting. Tell them I have a family emergency," he cut in, grabbing his coat. Mrs. Chen frowned, puzzled. "A family emergency? Everyone in the company knows Ethan Reed has no family." "Just do it, Mrs. Chen," he replied, not giving her the chance to question him further. Ethan walked with decisive steps across the main lobby of the building. Outside, the storm had already taken over. The rain poured like a wall of water, almost horizontal in the wind. The doorman tried to hand him an umbrella, but it would be useless in such a storm. "Is your car waiting, Mr. Reed?" the doorman asked. "No, I'll take the subway," Ethan answered, surprising the man. Ethan threw himself into the storm. The rain drenched him instantly, soaking his $3,000 Italian suit in seconds. The wind screamed against his face, and the thunder was so close that he could feel it in his chest. Normally, it only took him 7 minutes to reach the entrance to Grand Central Station. Today, fighting the storm, it took him nearly 20 minutes. When he finally reached the stairs that led underground, he was soaked to the bone with water dripping from his clothes, forming puddles at his feet. The station was in chaos. Hundreds of people crowded inside, waiting for the storm to pass. Announcements about delays and cancellations echoed through the loudspeakers. Ethan pushed his way through the crowd, heading toward the platform where Eleanor and Sophie usually sat. When he saw them, his heart clenched. The platform was partially flooded. The drainage system, never designed to handle such a volume of water, couldn't keep up. The two girls were trapped on their familiar bench, now turned into a small island. The water was rising around them several inches deep. They huddled together, their arms wrapped tightly around each other, clearly shivering. The blankets Ethan had brought them a few days ago were soaked useless against the cold. Sophie's face was buried in Eleanor's chest, the older sister's arms protecting her. "Eleanor, Sophie," he called, rushing toward them. Eleanor looked up, and the relief in her eyes almost knocked Ethan over. "You're here," she said, her voice trembling. "Of course I'm here," he replied, getting closer. "You're both soaked." Sophie looked up. Her lips were slightly blue, her teeth chattering. "The roof's leaking," she explained, pointing above where streams of water were trickling through cracks in the concrete. Ethan looked around. The water was still rising. Staff members were running around trying to organize an evacuation. An announcement blared over the loudspeakers. "Attention passengers, due to flooding, Grand Central Station will close in 30 minutes. Please move to the exits in an orderly manner." He made an immediate decision. "You can't stay here. You're coming with me." Eleanor's expression was a mix of skepticism and desperation. "Mom said not to leave the station." Ethan knelt down, meeting her gaze, even though his knees were submerged in the cold water. "Eleanor, look around. The station is closing. Everyone has to leave. You'll come with me until the storm passes. After that, we'll come back. I promise." She bit her lip, weighing the options. A deafening thunderclap made Sophie scream and bury her face into her sister. "Okay," Eleanor finally agreed. "But just until the storm is over." Ethan nodded. "Just until then." Quickly, he helped them gather a few things into their backpacks. Sophie's stuffed bear was soaked and dripping water. The books he had brought them were ruined by the water. "Okay, little one," he said to Sophie, holding out his arms. To his surprise, she came to him without hesitation, allowing him to pick her up. She was shaking so much that he could feel the trembling in his own body. Eleanor took his other hand, and the three of them began their journey out of the station. Outside, the storm was still raging. Ethan spotted a taxi pulling over to drop off a passenger and rushed toward it, still holding Sophie and pulling Eleanor along. "Upper East Side," he said to the driver, quickly getting into the cab with the two girls. "Park Avenue and 73rd. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror, noticing the drenched children. "This crazy storm, huh?" he remarked. "Looks like you got caught off guard." "It's worse than that," Ethan replied, wrapping his arms around the two girls, trying to warm them up. The taxi crawled through the flooded streets of Manhattan. What should have been a 15-minute trip stretched into almost an hour. Sophie had fallen asleep in Ethan's arms, exhausted and still shivering. Eleanor stared out the window, watching the city submerged in water. "I've never been in a taxi," she said softly. Ethan looked at her in surprise. "Never." She shook her head. "Mom said it was too expensive." Ethan wanted to ask more, but he held back. This wasn't the time. Finally, the taxi stopped in front of a magnificent Art Deco building. Ethan paid the driver and stepped out, still holding Sophie, with Eleanor tightly gripping his hand. The doorman raised an eyebrow when he saw him with the two girls, but quickly regained his composure. "Good evening, Mr. Reed." "Good evening, Frank. I need a few towels." "Right away, sir." In the private elevator that went straight to his penthouse, Eleanor remained silent, observing her surroundings. Her eyes were fixed from the marble floors to the mirrored walls. "You really live here?" she finally asked, her voice small. "Yes," Ethan replied. "On the top floor, alone." "Yes, why?" "It's too big for just one person," she commented. Ethan didn't have a simple answer. Why did he need a 900-square-meter penthouse just for himself? He had never asked himself that before. "I guess I never really thought about it," he answered honestly. The elevator door opened into the foyer of the apartment. Eleanor let out a small gasp. The space was truly impressive, even by New York standards. The ceiling was twice as high, and the glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city. The hardwood floors, minimalist and elegant furnishings. It looked like something straight out of an architectural magazine. Perfect, luxurious, but entirely soulless. "Let's go. We need to change out of these wet clothes," Ethan said, leading her inside. "I'll find some dry clothes for you." They walked down a hallway to a guest bedroom that had never been used. Ethan carefully laid Sophie, still asleep, on the large bed that seemed to swallow her tiny body. "Can you stay with your sister for a bit?" he asked, going to fetch towels and dry clothes. Eleanor nodded, sitting next to her sister. She looked so small in the vast room, a fragile image against the backdrop of luxury. Ethan quickly gathered what they needed: soft towels, 2 of his t-shirts, a few warm socks. He hesitated, then grabbed his old Columbia sweatshirt, thinking that Eleanor could use it as a blanket. When he returned to the room, both girls were awake. Sophie was looking around with wide eyes, as if waking up on another planet. "Where are we?" she asked, still groggy. "At Uncle Ethan's house," Eleanor answered. "Just until the storm passes." Ethan handed them the towels and dry clothes. "The bathroom's over there," he pointed. "You can take a hot shower if you want." When the two girls disappeared into the bathroom, Ethan went to the kitchen. He wasn't a great cook, but he knew a few basic dishes. He put a pot of soup on the stove, prepared a few grilled cheese sandwiches, and warmed up milk to make hot chocolate. The sound of water running in the apartment no longer felt too empty. 20 minutes later, the girls emerged completely changed. Their faces were flushed from the hot water, their hair damp and clean. Dressed in Ethan's oversized t-shirts, they looked even smaller, but somehow more comfortable. Eleanor wore the Columbia sweatshirt on top, the sleeves rolled up several times to reveal her small hands. "Feeling better?" Ethan asked. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "The water's so warm." "And the soap smells nice," Eleanor added, seeming slightly embarrassed by her enjoyment. "Come eat," Ethan invited, pointing to the kitchen table where he had set up a simple meal. They sat down, their eyes lighting up when they saw the food. Sophie immediately drank the hot chocolate, leaving a mustache of brown on her lips. Eleanor cautiously tasted the soup, then began eating with genuine relish. "This is really good," she admitted between spoonfuls. After they finished eating, Ethan led them to the living room. The storm still raged outside, flashes of lightning, occasionally illuminating the dramatic cityscape, but inside it was warm, dry, and safe. He turned on the TV, found a cartoon channel. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, when the storm clears, we can go back to the station." Sophie curled up on the giant leather sofa, nodded absently, captivated by the colorful images on the screen. However, Eleanor looked at him with a seriousness that didn't seem to match her age. "Thank you, Uncle," she said simply. Ethan sat down in the armchair opposite, watching the two girls. The rain still lashed against the windows, but for the first time in years, his apartment didn't feel empty anymore. It wasn't just a place to sleep between workdays. What had started as a temporary refuge from the rain had become something entirely different, a home. And he, who had grown so accustomed to his own loneliness, felt something new stirring in his chest, a love that transcended pity or charity, a need to protect that went beyond moral duty. Ethan Reed, a billionaire who had built an empire but never a home, had fallen asleep on that armchair, watching over two children who weren't his but somehow were filling the empty spaces in his life. Outside, the storm still raged, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone anymore. 3 weeks after the stormy night, their lives began to settle in their own way. Eleanor and Sophie had returned to the train station as Ethan had promised, but now there was an undeniable, invisible bond that had connected them to him. Ethan's visits still happened every day, but now there was a clear schedule. He arrived at 6 p.m., bringing dinner, and stayed until 8. On weekends, he came earlier and stayed longer. Mrs. Chen no longer questioned his set evening appointments. His colleagues had also grown accustomed to his new routine of heading home at a reasonable hour. No one knew that the powerful CEO of Novatech spent his evenings on a train station bench reading stories to two homeless girls, and he liked it that way. On a Friday evening, as they were eating pasta from Mr. Vincenzo's restaurant, Ethan decided it was time to act. He knew this arrangement couldn't last forever. The two girls needed stability, a real home. "Do you girls remember Mr. Vincenzo's restaurant?" he asked. Sophie nodded enthusiastically, her mouth full of tomato sauce. "I talked to him, and he gave me the number of a friend, a private investigator," Ethan said, looking at Eleanor. "I asked him to search for your mom." Eleanor froze. Her gaze was filled with skepticism and a little fear. "Why would you do that?" "You deserve to know what happened," Ethan replied. "And if she wants to come back, she needs to know where you are. I'll help you find her." The truth was, Ethan wasn't entirely sure of his own intentions. Part of him wanted to find the truth so the sisters could have closure. Another part feared the outcome. What if the investigator found their mother? Would she come back to take them away from him? He had already started loving the two girls more than he expected, and the fear of losing them was a new and overwhelming feeling. The adoption journey began quietly. Detective Miller, a former New York cop with a small and discreet office, was hired. Ethan provided all the information he knew. The girls' names were Eleanor and Sophie Lopez. Their mother's name was Clara, and a few scattered details about their life. "This could just be a fake name," Miller said, his tone doubtful. "People living on the margins of society often don't have paperwork." "Just look," Ethan insisted. He couldn't sit still. He needed to know the truth. While Miller conducted the investigation, Ethan's life with the two girls continued to change. On the first weekend, Ethan convinced the sisters to come to his apartment. At first, Eleanor insisted they had to go back to the train station, but Ethan had a conversation with her. "We'll go back on Sunday morning if you want, I promise. But tonight, sleep in a warm bed." And they stayed. The penthouse, which had once been a soulless space, slowly began to come alive. At first, it was subtle changes: a purple toothbrush and a pink one in the guest bathroom, a tiny pair of slippers at the door, a children's book left on the coffee table. Gradually, their things began to take over the space. Ethan bought them new beds, a pirate-themed bed for Eleanor and a princess bed for Sophie. When they saw the beds, Sophie jumped for joy while Eleanor just stood quietly. "You didn't have to do this," Eleanor said. "I want to," Ethan replied. "Whether temporary or permanent, you deserve a cozy place to call your own." On weekend mornings, Ethan was woken by the sound of giggling from the kitchen. He walked in to find Sophie trying to make pancakes, flour scattered everywhere, while Eleanor tried to keep the batter from spilling over. "We wanted to make breakfast," Eleanor explained nervously, glancing at his reaction. Ethan smiled. "Can I help?" That was the first time they cooked together. Ethan discovered that he wasn't bad in the kitchen when he had someone to share it with. Sophie was clumsy but enthusiastic. Eleanor was meticulous and perfectionistic. He balanced them both. When they finally sat down to eat the pancakes, some perfect, some misshapen, Ethan realized he had never felt so at peace. As time passed, Detective Miller called weekly but had no news. No records of a Clara Lopez matched the description. No missing person reports. No clues in the homeless shelters. "Keep looking," Ethan always insisted. On quiet nights after the girls had fallen asleep, Ethan allowed himself to think about the impossible. What if the mother was never found? What if they stayed with him? The thought both terrified and excited him. He was growing more attached to something that he could lose at any moment. One night, as they were watching a movie in the living room, Sophie suddenly asked, "Do you think Mom is watching a movie too?" That unexpected question created an instant silence in the room. Eleanor looked at her sister with worry and sadness. "I don't know, Sophie," Ethan replied softly. "Mom loved princess movies." Sophie continued, "She said I looked like a princess." Ethan's throat tightened. "You really do look like a princess." Eleanor stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the TV, but Ethan knew she wasn't really watching. After a few seconds, she whispered, "Sometimes I miss the smell of Mom." The simplicity of that confession hit Ethan like a punch. Sophie nodded strongly. "Mom smells like flowers," Sophie added. "Even when we didn't have a home, she always used the little perfume samples she got." Ethan listened, absorbing every detail about a woman he had never met, but whose absence was shaping his life. "How did your mom treat you?" he asked gently. Sophie smiled. "She told the best stories, and she sang when we couldn't sleep." Eleanor paused before speaking. "Most of the time she was good, but sometimes she'd be really sad. She could stay in bed all day or get anxious, talk really fast, come up with crazy plans. But she loved us," Sophie quickly added. "She always said that." Ethan nodded deep in thought. The portrait forming was of a woman struggling with her own challenges, possibly mental health issues made worse by poverty and stress. "Are you still looking for Mom?" Eleanor asked, her sharp eyes meeting his. Ethan was surprised. He had never mentioned Miller or the investigation. "How did you know?" "One time I heard you on the phone," she explained, "talking about shelters and schools." Ethan hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. "Yes, I'm looking for her. I think you both want to know what happened." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Thank you." Just one word, but it was full of meaning. For the first time, Ethan felt sure that he had made the right decision. His apartment continued to change subtly. A corner of the living room now had a toy chest. The refrigerator door, once impersonal, was now covered with colorful drawings. A whole shelf was dedicated to children's books. Ethan noticed his vocabulary had shifted since being with them. His posture was more relaxed, and he smiled more. His colleagues commented that he seemed different, but he kept the reason a secret. The girls also changed. Sophie looked healthier, her cheeks rounder, her sleep more peaceful. Eleanor smiled more, spoke more, and sometimes even laughed loudly, a rare, precious sound that Ethan treasured more than anything. It was amazing how quickly they had bonded. They began to understand each other without words. Ethan knew exactly which cereal Sophie liked for breakfast. Eleanor could tell when he was worried about work, even when he tried to hide it. Sophie had a talent for making them both laugh when things got too heavy. Sometimes, when leaving the station on Friday nights, Ethan would glance at them through the rearview mirror, two little heads sitting together in the back seat, talking about their day or humming songs they had learned. And a dangerous, hopeful thought would cross his mind. "We're a family." But then the phone rang, and it was Miller with another update, and reality hit once again. 8 weeks into the investigation, Miller requested a face-to-face meeting. Ethan felt heavy on the drive to the detective's office. "I have the final report," Miller said, placing a briefcase on the desk. Ethan stared at it without touching it. "There's nothing," the detective replied with a sigh. "Absolutely nothing. We've checked every Eliza or Elizabeth Lopez in the system cross-referenced with women with 2 daughters, expanded across all states, checked death records, arrest records, hospital records, eviction cases. There's no match. It's possible this is a fake name, or maybe she never officially registered the girls. There are a lot of possibilities." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of emotions: sadness for not having answers, relief that no one had come to take the girls away, and guilt for feeling that relief. "We can expand the search further," Miller suggested. "International databases, different name variations, hire more staff." "No," Ethan said firmly. "This is enough." Miller looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "You've done everything you could, Mr. Reed. More than most people." Ethan grabbed the briefcase, paid the final bill, and left the office carrying a pile of meaningless papers. Sitting in the car, he opened the briefcase and skimmed through the report. The investigation notes were meticulous, leading to one conclusion: the mother of Eleanor and Sophie had disappeared without a trace. Maybe she had died. Maybe she had chosen to abandon them. Maybe she was too sick to care for them. They would never know. And what did that mean now? Ethan felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. These children had no one else. Their waiting at the train station had been in vain. He closed the briefcase and looked out the car window, watching the bustling city. New York, a city of millions of stories. So many of them would be lost forever. Like Clara's story, a mother who left her 2 daughters at the subway station and vanished like smoke. For the first time since the search began, Ethan allowed himself to fully accept the truth. She wouldn't come back. She would never come back. But he was here. He had found Eleanor and Sophie when they were lonely. He had cared when no one else did. "I will stay," he whispered to himself. A small but powerful promise that felt sacred. And though he was sad for the girls, sad for the closure they would never have, sad for the unanswered questions, he also felt a new certainty. What started as an act of charity, as empathy for 2 abandoned children, had become something much deeper. He picked up the phone and dialed the number he had found a few days ago but had never had the courage to call. "Dr. Catherine Palmer Family Law Office," a voice answered. "My name is Ethan Reed," he said, his voice steady. "I'd like to make an appointment regarding an adoption procedure." He hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The road ahead would be long and possibly difficult. There would be questions, investigations, social workers, but he would do whatever it took, because where there had once been absence, he would create presence. Where there had once been unexplainable pain, he would build a new life. He placed the briefcase in the back seat and drove home where the 2 girls were waiting, drawing at the kitchen table, counting the hours until he returned, just as they did every day. To them, he would be the one who came back, the one who stayed, the one who chose to stay every day. The New York City Department of Child Services office was located in a dreary old building in the heart of downtown. Gray walls, plastic chairs, and fake plants, futilely attempting to bring life to the space. Ethan sat on one of those uncomfortable chairs, a stack of files on his lap, waiting for his name to be called. Around him, others were also waiting. A young couple holding hands, an older woman with a lively child, a middle-aged man filling out forms. Each of them had their own story, their own battle with bureaucracy. "Mr. Reed," a voice called out. Ethan stood up and followed the receptionist down a hallway to a small office. Behind a cluttered desk, a woman in her 50s with a tired expression sat. "I'm Mary Ann Thompson," she introduced herself, "senior social worker. Please have a seat." Ethan did as instructed, noticing the dozens of photographs of children decorating the walls, some formal, others candid children of all ages and circumstances. He guessed these were cases from the past lives she had helped shape. "So, Mr. Reed, I've read your preliminary information." Thompson began opening a file on her computer. "You found 2 abandoned girls at the subway station about 3 months ago, is that right?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "Eleanor and Sophie Lopez. And you've been taking care of them since then. Initially, you visited them at the station. Then the girls started staying at your apartment on weekends. Now they live with you full-time, although—" She paused. "Although there's no official paperwork," Ethan finished for her. Thompson nodded, unsurprised. "And you've been trying to find their mother. I hired a private investigator. He searched thoroughly but found nothing. No records, no clues. And what brings you here today, Mr. Reed?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I want to legalize this situation. I want the girls to be able to go to school, to receive medical care, to have a real home. And for that, I need legal guardianship." Thompson studied him for a moment, not rushing. In her 2 decades as a social worker, she had learned to read people. She had seen all kinds, well-meaning but naive, manipulative people seeking personal gain, and those who were genuinely dedicated. "What do you do, Mr. Reed?" she asked. "I'm the CEO of Novatech. We develop clean energy technology." Thompson raised an eyebrow, recognizing the name. "A multi-billion-dollar company." "Interesting," she remarked, jotting down a note. "It's not every day that a billionaire CEO comes here wanting to care for 2 abandoned children." There was a hint of skepticism in her voice, but Ethan didn't feel offended. She was just doing her job. "I understand your concern," he said. "It does seem strange. I've seen a lot of strange things in this job, Mr. Reed. Some miraculous, some horrifying. My job is to make sure this is the first type." She closed the file on her computer. "I'll need to visit your home, see how the girls are doing, and speak with each of them privately." "Of course. And you realize this is just the beginning of a process, right? If we proceed, there will be psychological evaluations, background checks, interviews with people in your circle. It's very thorough." Ethan nodded. "I've prepared for it." Most people say that, Thompson said with a light smile, but very few are truly ready. The visit was scheduled for the following Saturday. Ethan spent the entire week preparing the girls, explaining who Mrs. Thompson was and why she was coming. "Is she going to take us away?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with fear. "No, sweetie," Ethan reassured her. "She just wants to make sure you're okay here, that I'm taking care of you properly." Eleanor, as usual, went straight to the point. "Do you want to be our legal dad?" The direct question took him by surprise. "I want you to have a permanent home," he said carefully. "I want you to go to school to get health care, to be safe and happy." "You still didn't answer my question," Eleanor insisted, her wisdom far beyond her years. Ethan smiled. "Yes, Eleanor, I want to be your legal dad if that's what both of you want." Sophie immediately jumped up and hugged him. Eleanor stood still, but a small smile appeared on her face. "I think that would be good," she finally said. When the doorbell rang that Saturday, the apartment had been cleaned thoroughly. Ethan didn't do it just to show off his wealth, but because he genuinely wanted to impress Thompson. "Good morning," she greeted as she entered. "Thank you for coming," Ethan responded, leading her inside. "The girls are in the living room." Eleanor and Sophie were waiting on the couch, wearing the clothes they had specially picked for the occasion. Sophie wore a purple dress that highlighted her sun-kissed skin. Eleanor had chosen jeans and a navy blue t-shirt. She was always practical. "Hello, girls," Thompson said, sitting across from them. "I'm Marianne. You can call me Mari if you'd like." Sophie smiled shyly. Eleanor nodded, her face still guarded. "I'd like to talk to you for a bit. Get to know how you're doing. Is that okay?" The next 2 hours were a careful dance. Thompson asked to see the girls' room, now filled with books, toys, and themed beds. She complimented the vibrancy of the room, the neatness, and the details that reflected their personalities. Then she requested to speak privately with each of the girls. Ethan waited in the kitchen tense while Thompson first spoke with Sophie, then with Eleanor in their bedroom. When the interviews were over, Thompson asked to speak with him again. The two girls went to watch TV while the adults talked in the kitchen. "They seem happy," the social worker began. "I hope so," Ethan replied. "Sophie is very expressive. She said a lot of nice things about you. She said you make the best pancakes in the world and never yell, even when she spills juice on the carpet." Ethan smiled. That carpet needed to be replaced anyway. "Eleanor is more analytical," Thompson said. "She told me that once you canceled an important meeting to pick up Sophie at the station when she had a fever, and you never lie about important things. That's a big compliment from her." Thompson nodded. "Indeed." She paused, looking around the apartment. "You have a beautiful home, Mr. Reed. More importantly, it's a home full of love. That's very rare." "Thank you." "There's still a long way to go," she continued. "First, we'll look into temporary guardianship while we investigate further. If everything goes smoothly, we can discuss formal adoption later. What do I need to do to get started?" "Fill out a lot of forms." Thompson smiled, pulling a file from her bag. "And attend some hearings. But the most important thing has been done. You've created a safe, stable environment for them." As he signed the first documents, Ethan felt a weight lifted. A weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The uncertainty, the fear that at any moment someone might show up to take the girls away. "Will they have to testify in court?" he asked, worried. "Maybe, but in a way that's appropriate for their age. Nothing to be afraid of," Thompson reassured him. "And based on what I've seen today, I don't see any issues. Clearly they feel safe with you." Thompson packed up the documents and stood to leave. At the door, she turned back to Ethan with one final comment. "You know, Mr. Reed, in my 20 years of doing this job, I've learned how to recognize real love when I see it. Not the romantic kind you see in movies, but a different kind of love, the kind that's built every day through small gestures. Today, I saw a lot of that here." Ethan felt a warmth spreading in his chest. "Thank you. I'll see you soon," Thompson said as she left. "Congratulations. The family you're building here is truly special." After the social worker left, Ethan returned to the living room where Eleanor and Sophie were anxiously waiting. "Oineti." Sophie ran straight to him. "Did she like us? Can we stay?" Ethan smiled and sat between them on the couch. "Yes to both questions. We still have a process ahead, but we've taken the first official step." Eleanor stared at him intently. "What does that really mean?" "It means we're not just the three of us against the world anymore," Ethan explained. "Now the law is on our side too." Sophie didn't fully understand, but Eleanor did. Her small face lit up with understanding. "So, now it's real?" she asked. "Official. Yes," Ethan confirmed, feeling the weight of those simple words. "Now it's official." What had started as a chance meeting at a subway station born from shared loneliness and empathy for pain now had a name, legal documents, and societal recognition. The care that had once existed only in the private space between them now had a public legal and official dimension. But Ethan knew as he hugged the two girls who had changed his life that the most important part had been there long before any documents were signed. The process of temporary guardianship went surprisingly smoothly. Ethan's lawyers, along with the influence of his name, expedited a system that was often sluggish. In just 6 weeks, Judge Reynolds had approved temporary guardianship, allowing him to enroll the girls in the prestigious Riverside School, just a few blocks from his apartment. A comfortable, warm life gradually took shape. Breakfast together, school for the girls work for Ethan parent-teacher meetings, homework at the dining table, and cozy dinners. Mrs. Thompson's visits became less frequent, more intimate, almost like a family friend. It was a warm Sunday morning in the spring, the first sunny day after a harsh winter. Sunlight poured through the large windows of the apartment, casting golden streaks across the living room floor. "The weather's perfect outside," Ethan remarked, glancing up at the cloudless sky. Sophie, who was arranging her collection of seashells on the coffee table, a gift from Mrs. Thompson during her last visit, looked up. "Can we go to the park?" "Dad," Ethan smiled. He still smiled every time he heard the word dad. "Great idea." Eleanor, absorbed in an adventure book, looked up. "Which park?" "How about Central Park? There's a new playground near the lake." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Does it have swings?" "It has swings, slides, everything," Ethan confirmed. Half an hour later, they were ready. Sophie wore a yellow dress and new white sneakers. Eleanor chose denim shorts, a navy t-shirt, and a baseball cap that Ethan had bought for her. She carried a small backpack with water snacks and sunscreen. Eleanor was always practical, always prepared. The trip to the park was filled with laughter. Sophie couldn't stop talking about a science project at school about how plants grew better in sunlight than in the shade. Eleanor occasionally corrected a few scientific details, naturally taking on the role of the older sister, the eager learner. Ethan watched them through the rearview mirror, amazed at the transformation over the past few weeks. Their cheeks rounder, their eyes brighter, and the way they swung their arms excitedly as they spoke. Life was returning, blooming like the trees in spring. Central Park was crowded that Sunday with families out enjoying the beautiful weather. Ethan found a parking spot, held the girls' hands, and walked toward the new playground by the lake. It was an impressive area, colorful equipment, cushioned flooring, a spiral slide, seesaws, swings, and even a small climbing wall. Sophie stopped at the entrance, awestruck. "This is amazing." Eleanor tried to hide it, but her eyes were also wide with anticipation. "Go ahead," Ethan said, smiling. "I'll sit on that bench and watch you." Sophie didn't need a second invitation. She let go of Ethan's hand and ran straight for the swings. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, still holding his hand. "Go on," he gently encouraged. "Have fun." She smiled one of the rare smiles that lit up her face, then ran after her sister. Ethan sat on a bench under a large tree, perfectly positioned to see the entire playground. He watched Sophie on the swing, her feet kicking the air, her hair flying in the wind, her face tilted up to the sky. Eleanor, initially observing the other children, was soon drawn to the climbing wall. With her characteristic methodical approach, Eleanor studied the wall before beginning her climb. Ethan watched nervously, wondering if he should move closer to ensure her safety, but she climbed with surprising agility, reaching the top quickly. From there, she scanned the playground for Ethan's face and waved, her face radiant. He waved back, his heart swelling. On the swing next to Sophie, a girl with curly hair had joined in. In just a few minutes, they were laughing and playing like old friends. After conquering the climbing wall, Eleanor joined an older girl at the spiral slide. They exchanged a few words, then climbed the steps together to slide down. An hour passed. Ethan alternated between watching the girls and responding to occasional texts on his phone. When he looked up again, he saw something that made him immediately put his phone away. Sophie and Eleanor were running. Not just moving from one play area to another, but actually running on an empty patch of grass beside the playground. They ran the way children should, free, carefree, and innocent in their joy. Sophie led the way, arms spread out like wings, head tilted back, her laughter reaching Ethan even from a distance. Eleanor followed, usually so cautious, now loosened up her hair, flying out of her cap, her smile so wide it seemed to spill out of her face. That was when Ethan realized what had changed. Since the day he met them, there had been something in the two girls, especially Eleanor, that he had deeply noticed. A constant vigilance, a gaze, always scanning for exits, wary of who was coming and going, always alert waiting. They carried that waiting in their bodies, in their eyes, in the way they sat at the edge of a seat, ready to stand up if necessary. Now, for the first time, they weren't looking back. They weren't scanning the crowd for a familiar face. They weren't scrutinizing every woman who walked by to see if it was their mother. They weren't stopping their fun to anxiously check the paths in the park. They were simply there, living in the moment, fully present. Ethan felt a powerful wave of emotion so strong that he had to take a few deep breaths. It was like witnessing a silent miracle, the end of waiting. The moment when the past loosened its cruel grip, allowing the present to finally exist fully. The two girls ran in circles on the grass, then rolled around, then ran again. Eleanor grabbed Sophie's waist and spun her around both of them, laughing so loudly that other families had to look over, infected by their pure joy. When they finally got tired, they ran back to him, faces flushed, eyes sparkling. "Did you see how high I went on the swing?" Dad, Sophie asked, out of breath. "I did," Ethan replied, smiling. "You looked like you were flying." "And I climbed to the top of the climbing wall," Eleanor said, her voice rare with pride. "Twice." "Are you hungry? I brought snacks." They sat on the bench, sharing sandwiches, fruit, and juice. Sophie chattered nonstop about every detail of her adventure. Eleanor ate in silence, but with a newfound contentment. "Did you have fun?" Ethan asked. "Lots of fun," Sophie answered immediately. Eleanor glanced at the playground, then at the blue sky, and finally at Ethan. "This is the best day," she said simply. After finishing their meal, they returned to the playground. This time, Ethan was persuaded to join in. He pushed the swing, caught them at the bottom of the slide, even tried the climbing wall under Eleanor's excited watch. The day passed. The sun gradually set, and many families began to leave. Ethan checked the time. "It's getting late, girls. Shall we head home?" To his surprise, there was no protest. Perhaps because they no longer feared that this happiness would disappear. There would be other Sundays, other parks, other carefree runs. "Can we come back next week?" "Dad," Sophie asked, holding his hand on the way back to the car. "Of course," he replied. Eleanor was on the other side, holding his other hand, a rare gesture from her. "Thank you for today, Dad," she said softly. Ethan gently squeezed her hand. "It was a special day, wasn't it?" She nodded, her gaze distant, as if processing something important. "Today, I didn't wait." 3 simple words, but they carried so much meaning. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I didn't either," he replied. In the car on the way home, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from so much fun. Eleanor looked out the window, watching the city go by. "Do you know what's funny, Dad?" she suddenly said. "What's that, sweetheart?" Today, I didn't even think about looking. Looking for what Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Looking to see if Mom was there. Eleanor whispered. I didn't even think about it. The silence that followed was gentle, almost radiant. The waiting that ever-present companion had vanished in the spring sunlight. In its place was something new, the ability to live fully in the moment with the people you are with. The shadow of the past would never fully disappear. There would be hard days, unanswered questions, scars that time could soothe but not erase. But today, on this perfect Sunday, the 3 of them had learned how to live in the present. And Ethan thought, as he drove home with his 2 daughters, that this was the real miracle. Autumn began to blanket New York in shades of red and gold. A comfortable life had settled between the 3 of them. Mondays were movie nights with pizza. Wednesdays, Ethan would leave work early to watch Sophie swim. Saturdays, he took Eleanor to the library, where she could pick as many books as she wanted. The visits to Grand Central, once a daily habit, gradually turned into weekly ones, then bi-weekly, until one day, Eleanor simply said, "I think we don't need to go there anymore, Dad." Ethan didn't ask. He just nodded, knowing exactly what it meant. The apartment had transformed entirely. Family photos now hung on the once empty walls. The living room had gained a toy box. The guest room had become the girls' room with shelves full of books, colorful furniture, and a reading tent that Ethan had set up one weekend. The temporary guardianship had been extended without issue. The adoption hearing had finally been scheduled. All social worker reports were positive. His lawyers ensured that this was just a formality. That Thursday evening, Ethan made the girls' favorite spaghetti and meatballs, the same dish he had brought to them on the second day he met them at the train station. Sophie helped set the table humming a tune she learned at school. Eleanor focused on a complex puzzle on the coffee table, a gift from Mrs. Chen, Ethan's secretary, who had become an aunt figure to the girls. "Dinner's ready," Ethan called. Sophie immediately ran to the table. Eleanor carefully placed the puzzle pieces back into the box before joining. They sat in their usual spots, Ethan at the head of the table, Eleanor on the right, and Sophie on the left. The meal was full of joy, brimming with stories of school weekend plans, and a lively debate about which movie to watch on Saturday night. It was an ordinary scene, just a family having dinner together, but for Ethan, every moment gleamed with a beauty that was almost sacred. When they finished dessert, chocolate ice cream, another favorite from their early days together, Ethan took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now as it arrived for real, every word seemed insufficient. "Girls," he began, his voice more serious, drawing their attention. "I need to tell you something important." Sophie immediately looked worried. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, no, no." Ethan quickly reassured them. "You haven't done anything wrong. This is about the future." Eleanor looked at him with sharp eyes. "What future?" Ethan took another deep breath. "Do you remember when I was looking for your mom?" Instantly, the atmosphere at the table shifted. Sophie looked down at her empty plate. Eleanor froze, only a slight tremor in her chin, betraying her emotions. "I tried to find your mom, but I couldn't," Ethan said softly. "I looked everywhere I could." Sophie raised tear-filled eyes. "Mom's not coming back, is she?" "I don't know, sweetie," Ethan answered honestly. "I can't promise she won't ever come back. But after all this time, I think we need to accept that life has moved on." Eleanor nodded slowly, as though finally allowing herself to accept something she'd known for a long time. But Ethan continued, "I want you to know that in the process of looking for her, something miraculous happened." His eyes welled with tears, and he didn't try to hide them. "I found you, and that saved me." "Saved you from what?" Sophie asked, confused. Ethan smiled through his tears. "From loneliness, from emptiness, from a life full of everything but meaning." Eleanor looked at him intently, taking in every word. "Before I met you two, I had money, a company, everything I thought I needed, but I had no one to share it with. No morning laughter, no bedtime stories, no pictures on my fridge." Ethan paused, swallowing hard. "No family." Sophie placed her tiny hand on his hand on the table, a simple gesture, but full of comfort. "In the next few days, we'll go to court to finalize the adoption." Ethan continued, "That's when a judge will officially decide if we can be a family legally." "Will it be okay?" Sophie asked anxiously. "The lawyers say it will. All the reports are good. So, we'll really be a family?" Sophie asked, hope clear in her voice. Ethan turned to Eleanor, who remained silent. Their eyes met. "Eleanor, what do you think?" She paused for a moment, choosing her words. "When you're sad, you make a sound in your throat. It's not exactly a sigh. It's more like a soft, She mimicked the sound gently. Ethan blinked, confused by the sudden change. "And you always put the plate on the left side of the dish," Eleanor continued. "And when you concentrate, your forehead scrunches into 3 lines." She pointed to her own forehead. "When Sophie has nightmares, you sing that song in Italian, even though you don't actually know the lyrics, and you always put her favorite cookies on the highest shelf, thinking she can't reach them." Sophie smiled and nodded. "But I can reach them. And you leave the hallway light on even though it wastes electricity, because you know I don't like total darkness." Eleanor finished. Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "What are you two talking about, Eleanor?" The two sisters exchanged a look, a silent communication only the two of them understood. Then they both looked at him. "We've already felt like a family," Eleanor said simply. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "A family," Sophie replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Right there at the dinner table, with the plates still there and the melting chocolate ice cream, Ethan Reed realized the true meaning of becoming wealthy. And then he spoke, his voice trembling with emotion. "Do you both agree to let me be your official dad? Not just legally, but for real?" Sophie jumped out of her seat and ran to hug him. "Yes, yes, yes." Eleanor stood up more calmly, but her smile was radiant. She walked around the table and joined the hug, the three of them forming a perfect circle. "I agree," she whispered. "We accept." The New York County Family Court stood in a grand building in the heart of the city. On that Friday morning, Ethan, Eleanor, and Sophie stepped up the marble steps, their hearts a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. The girls wore the new dresses they had chosen especially for the occasion. Ethan was in his best suit. In the waiting room, they met Mrs. Mary Ann Thompson, who greeted them warmly. "Ready?" she asked. "We've been ready since the first day at the train station," Ethan replied. The courtroom was a welcoming space designed for family cases. Judge Wilson, a middle-aged woman with compassionate eyes, presided. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted. "We are here to finalize the adoption of Eleanor and Sophie Lopez by Mr. Ethan Reed." The procedure went surprisingly quickly. The judge reviewed the reports and asked the girls a few questions, all of which were answered enthusiastically. Mr. Reed, Judge Wilson, said the court has carefully reviewed your case. All reports indicate that you have provided a stable, loving, and safe home for these children. Ethan nodded, too emotional to speak. And as for the surname, the judge continued. Will the children keep Lopez or take Matthews? Ethan looked at his daughters. They had discussed this at home but wanted to make the official decision in court. Matthews Lopez, Eleanor said firmly, "We want both." The judge smiled. A wonderful choice. Holding on to the past while embracing the future, she signed the final documents with a yellow pen. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I declare this adoption complete. Eleanor and Sophie Lopez are now officially Eleanor and Sophie Matthews Lopez, daughters of Ethan Reed, with all the rights and responsibilities that come with it." The judge smiled brightly. "Congratulations, Matthews Lopez family." Sophie let out a soft cheer of joy. Eleanor smiled, her eyes sparkling. Ethan embraced both of his daughters, not caring about the tears running down his cheeks. That night, after a day of celebration that included ice cream in the morning lunch at a special restaurant and a walk through Central Park, Ethan went to bed with the girls. Sophie fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted from so much excitement. Eleanor, as usual, stayed awake a little longer. "Are you happy, Dad?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Eleanor nodded, giving him her special knowing smile. "So am I," he said, adjusting the blanket around her. "Dad," Eleanor said, calling his name in a rare moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything." "How long did you know you wanted to be our dad?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I think it was the first day at the train station, but I only admitted it to myself the night of the storm when you both stayed here for the first time." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "I knew from that day," she said, yawning. "When you came back to get us in the rain, because moms leave, but dads always come back." Ethan's heart tightened. "I will always do that, Eleanor. I promise." "I know," she said, her eyes closing. "That's why we're a family." As she finally drifted to sleep, Ethan remained sitting between the two beds looking at his daughters now officially on paper recognized by law and the world. But the three of them knew that those documents only confirmed what their hearts had decided a long time ago. A bond sealed not by blood or paperwork, but by the daily choice to love, to care, to be present. In that quiet moment between the end of one day and the beginning of a future, Ethan Reed finally understood the true meaning of being part of something bigger than himself. 3 different lives, 3 different stories now woven into one heart in 3 bodies. The adoption had been approved, the documents had been signed, the room was ready, the school had been arranged, but nothing had changed as much as what had changed inside of them, the unwavering certainty that they had each other. They were now a family legally, but love had already been official long before. In a world where success is often measured by what we own, Ethan discovered that true wealth lies in the people we choose to care for. From a chance encounter at a subway station to becoming a family, this story reminds us all that sometimes the most beautiful connections are the ones we never expect. It's not about how much we have, but how much we're willing to give and love. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring journeys. And remember, it's never too late to make a difference in someone's life.